Good day, everyone. Welcome to this little interview. My name is Paul Stephen. I'm the CEO at Sagittarius, and I'm joined today by Rob Kerner. He's going to give us his insight into the challenges of facing innovation in the financial sector. Rob's been kind enough to do this with me. He's got a very colourful career. At one time, an F-14 pilot in the US Navy, and in more recent times, working at banks and working with tech startups. So, Rob, rather than me do it, actually, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Paul. That's great. Appreciate that. I'll try to condense it down. As you say, I have quite an eclectic career, but I try to think of it at least in three chunks. So one, as you mentioned, was an F-14 pilot for 10 years in the US Navy, landing on ships and doing all that kind of crazy stuff. I didn't want to be an airline pilot. I didn't want to stay in the Navy, so I got my MBA back in San Diego and went into business. Of the next sort of, we'll call it 25 years, half of that really, as you say, is working in big corporates. So John Deere, Hewlett Packard, and then in the latest part, RBS. And the other half of that was sort of interspersed was tech startups. So really doing all kinds of roles from sales, finance, operations in those tech startups. If we look at the RBS piece, we're talking about financial services today. I basically spent 3 years in the strategy team at the bank. So working on customer experience strategy, personal business banking strategy. And then I was sort of, I was just about sort of fed up with PowerPoints maybe. And I was thinking, okay, I'm ready to leave, but I had a chance to become head of innovation in business banking. And I thought it was a fantastic opportunity, which it was, to write a new piece of paper about what this opportunity was going to be. So my job was to set up a team that looked at all of the fintechs out there. This is about 4 years ago. We scouted, we chose the startups based on the strategy of the team, and we ran proof of concepts and pilots. So I think I can talk certainly from that side of my experiences during those 2 years for sure.
So that's great. So the idea of today really, and this is why I thought you'd be a great interviewee, sorry, was we see from our side, from an agency side, that within the financial services sector, lots of things are on, what happens in other industries. The financial services sector is crying out for it. Customer expectations are crying out for change and innovation and for things to be better connected. But actually the banking sector generally is always the one playing catch up, and you get these challenger banks and other apps and stuff come along which are not really being led by the big banks, and there are reasons for that, and I think that'd be worth exploring. It sounds like your time at RBS, you'd be able to see it from their perspective, but I mean that's where we see it from an agency point of view. Is that a view shared by yours and by the banks themselves?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, the first thing I would say is probably a disclaimer in that, we always it's very easy to bash the large banks, and having worked there for 5 years, it's an incredibly complex organization. And actually what they're doing is, it looks very simple on the outside, but it is quite complex. And banks have been quite innovative over those years. I mean, ATM machines, all those things. So they certainly have not been innovative. I think what you're alluding to is kind of how do they, marry what's expected, and use the word expectation, which is, I think, is exactly right. The expectation around digital has been just raised the bar so much higher that it's felt like it's left them behind. So I think you're right. There's a sort of expectation that's been caused by the Amazons, the Googles, all of this. That's how customer experience happens. So
yeah, and that's that's not their fault, if you like. Really, it's moving at a pace that any of us can keep up with, but. In terms of how, it doesn't matter if it's banks or financial services, has obviously got lots of different parts to it, but what is it that stops them? What are the key things that stop them moving on? Is it the attitude, they're not really interested? Is it the technical ability to be able to even do it? It feels like, from your experience, from what you explained, it isn't a matter of a lack of ideas. It's more, there's other things stopping it from happening.
Yeah, certainly not. I mean, this is always a mistake people make from the outside, is that RBS didn't know that digital banks were coming, and didn't know that that FX could be done better. I think, back to your point, what's stopping them is the flip side, and it's a bit of inertia. Any large company has the same thing. You've got the culture, the people, and that's not that people are not innovative. There's plenty of ideas there, and they know what they are. I think it's a little bit about the incentives. It's what what's in it, not and what's in it for me, but if I bring up an idea and it just goes nowhere, and you come back in 6 months and ask me again, never mind, right? So I think it's just not a culture that can do that very well, pick that stuff up. And I think last thing I would say is there is a technical side to this that is quite difficult. The banks were really heavily architected back in the sort of 20 years ago, and
more
at the time, cutting edge, 20 to 30 years probably. And
20
as a
years
friend of mine one
long
time
ago, Rob, it feels like
it's true. But I mean, a lot of times technology people will say, oh, you're doing batch technology because, obviously all these transactions are kind of captured all day and then run through a big machine all night. And, that doesn't lend itself very well to real-time reporting or real-time things, but it is very good at, doing, 20 million transactions a night or something.
So is that still an issue? That's my assumption is you've got legacy systems that are written in old technology, and we're trying to do all this new stuff with live data using APIs, etc. That's still a physical barrier in the system, in the machine.
Yeah, the majority of the transactions are still run in batch. So because of just the way it works, and also it is, again, it's very efficient. If you want to look at efficiency, it's very efficient at running huge volumes of transactions, which big banks are doing. So you can't have both. But anyway, I think, go ahead.
So I mean, again, I'm not trying to be naive when I say this. I'm just sort of, at the end of the day, that's just data, right? It's just the data in various places, and there are algorithms that process that data, etc. Yeah. What do you think stops that being sort of done in a different way, or moved? As you would now, people are moving from tin on shelves to cloud. This is obviously an extreme version of that, I know. But what stops that happening? Why is it so complicated?
Yeah, I think there's a technical side of it, which is one piece, but that can be overcome, as you said. I think the regulators also have stepped into, if you imagine there's a new piece of regulation, major piece of regulation coming almost every 12 months into the business. And these are not things that are conducive to kind of taking risks, right? So every time you just see another layer of that, I think that drives a lot of the behavior again around what's the real value add of doing that, putting it in the cloud or doing that. Customers aren't complaining that much. They have a statement every month. What's the problem? But back to your expectation piece, as that expectation moves, then it looks more out of step, basically.
So obviously the banks are by default risk averse, isn't it? It's in their sort of DNA. So obviously doing, like you say, making a change or whatever, it's like, well, if it ain't broke, then fix it, sort of thing. But obviously that for me then is, well, it's obviously the pain elsewhere in the business, or the strategy of the business is why they're not doing it, because at the moment it ain't broke, don't fix it. Whereas actually if there were a larger plan. So do you think is that an issue really in the big companies? They're not really looking over the horizon enough to know they need to sort this stuff out now?
Yeah, I think like any large organization, they're facing, it's not like they're sort of facing, if you take one of those challenges you sort of mentioned, it's easy to kind of attack that one problem, but you've got all kinds of things coming at you. So expansion geographically or growing the company. I think that the strategy to do that kind of work is very difficult, and it's also, again, there's a bunch of product lines or revenue lines in a big bank that are making lots of money and generating lots of jobs. There's a big machine going, and if you come along with something small over here and say we got some shiny thing which is it's going to be big in 5 years, you've got to invest now. You've got to do that. It's just human nature. I mean, Kodak, as I said, is a great example of sort of, they invented digital photography. They had it. They knew it was coming. They knew it was going to replace film. Yet, how could they not do it? It's because it's so difficult in a large organization. So much momentum to try to invest and do that kind of work.
Yeah. So if that's the case, if smaller, more agile businesses, or we discussed earlier, people could kind of, who from a banking background could go, I see the opportunity, it's here. What chance do they really have? How can small organizations sort of genuinely get things like this to market if actually it's always the big guys who are really the ones who are going to be able to roll it out to the masses?
That's a good point. There's been a lot of conversation about competition and how do you incentivize these folks to do that, and how you protect them, really, as you're saying, because once something gets going, a large organization like a bank can actually copy it, but can see it coming and now jump in and has the resources. I think what's been done is we've seen a couple of real shoots coming out right now. So you've seen the Monzos, the Revoluts, TransferWise. So there's a couple of real players have sort of stepped up now. Starling Bank and the banking side, Starling. I think once we get a few more of those going, those guys might be more interested in helping the small folks to join up. So it's a lot quicker to take an API and plug into Starling than it is to take an API and plug into the big banks.
Yeah, so they're not helped by legacy systems, but they've had to join the existing party, haven't they? Each of the banks have got their own systems, but they're all part of a wider ecosystem. So how have they managed to do that? How have they managed to bring in new technology or create a new fresh stack, but still be part of a larger ecosystem?
Yeah, I think what they've done is they've shrunk the offering down. So none of those folks are full service banks, really, completely. You don't have an invoice finance facility and asset-based management, all asset-based financing. So they've taken it down to what are the kind of core businesses that people use, which we all know about, which is a current account, savings account, loans, basic banking, people call it, but do it very well. Right. And the idea, of course, is to get users on that. My daughter's on Starling. She loves it. So she will come out, and eventually when she needs a loan, she'll do that, but it will take time to get there. So they've shrunken the offering down and focused on customers that really value that.
I think one of the things that's interesting for me, and it doesn't matter if it's the things you can then integrate with that. So thinking outside the banking is the wider ecosystem that exists. So you can, it knows that you're spending that money, that on your statement that's gone out to the gas company or the water company or whatever. So it kind of recognizes the way you're spending your money, and then can create sort of intel about that for you to help you manage your ways, etc. Equally, you've got, when it comes to things like mortgages, you've got people like Zoopla and the Rightmoves of this world, where there's other sort of fringe data points, which actually, if those things are connected, could really help. With a mortgage application, for example, well, why do we have to even go and get a valuation when I can already see on Zoopla what it is? So what do you think needs to change there?
Yeah, I think I agree with you that sort of that's where things are going to be going. If we look at young people, the idea of a bank almost is sort of a foreign thing to them. They're buying something and they're paying for it, and that's all it is. It's sort of, I just need to get that thing. So I think if a bank started thinking about that versus all the process and coming to us, and we're a trusted advisor sometimes, that's where things are going to go. You're right. So so there's always a race, though, as to who wins that, who's the owner. So if we use housing as an example, you mentioned sort of Zoopla. So is Zoopla your first point of call, or is the bank your first point of call? So there's a kind of turf war going on out there around who owns the home buying experience. And you're right. Once you become the owner of that, then what you're going to do is plug all, I can find you a plumber, I can get you Wi-Fi, I can get you this. And there's all kinds of services that will come off that. I think, and again, the bank on one side is a trusted advisor. It's sort of been there a long time. It's, your banker, whereas Zoopla is sort of new and fresh, but the other advantage they have obviously is speed. So they can connect with people very quickly and add new services very quickly. So I think you're right. It will go. I'm not sure who's going to win at the end. Who's going to be that? You have to have a first point of call.
It feels like the banks should win, because we don't all need Zoopla, but we all need a bank. We have to have a bank. So they have to exist in our ecosystem. So if they allow the other guys to come in and sort of eat their lunch, it feels like they've missed the opportunity. So
I think just one more thing on that one. I think you have to remember there's a couple things going on there. But just keep on mortgages for a second. You've got the process of doing a mortgage, right? And that's, as you said, picking up data, doing checks. There's that piece, but there's a whole capital piece, there's a money piece to that. And that's where, your Zooplas they'll do an amazing job of making it super slick. But, that managing that capital and kind of that huge book of mortgages that some are defaulting, some are starting, some are 30 years. Again, that's the complexity that you don't see as a single customer. You don't see they've got a portfolio of millions of different transactions. So I think, back to your point, will the banks win? The money part is quite difficult and hard to manage. So that's where they kind of own the space a bit.
Yeah, I think, like you say, from a consumer point of view, you just see the end product, which is I put my money in there, it stays there, and I take it out, or I pay it to various people. Where's the value in that? What are you doing, bank? You know, what's the value you add to me? And then, ironically, the fact that your app goes ching when you've had money in is the value they add to that relationship, which I know is a gimmick, but it kind of ironically is possibly something that really values.
Yeah, from the making money perspective, to make money out of that stuff you just talked about, you've got to basically lend money out at a less interest rate than, higher interest rate than you're paying. That's it. So the NIM, which is the net interest margin, is critical and not trivial, right? Because as soon as I give you a mortgage and things start to change, that thing is shrinking and growing. And actually, in today's environment, it's very difficult because the interest rates are so low. There's no room for margin to sort of squeeze there. If interest rates are high, you could say, we got 5 percentage points here we can play with. So it's trickier. I guess my point is it's trickier than just sort of doing the application.
I suppose that's what I see in other industries, and the banking field is no different. Actually, the margins are getting squeezed, and they all do the same thing, or the products are the same. You could argue that's the same when you book a hotel online using any of the different ones. You end up using the one that's got the most usable interface, the thing that connects, makes it easier, remembers you, gives you relevant information and things like that. So that feels to me the gap in banking at the moment is really recognizing actually the customer thinks you're all the same. It's those little things, that customer experience, which will become your differentiator. I think that doesn't matter if it's B2B or B2C, actually.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And there's examples of that around sort of the globe. If you look at TD Bank and Toronto Dominion Bank in Canada, they basically very simply said, here's a Pareto analysis of all the pain points for customers versus pain points for us. So it's hard for our employees to do it. It's hard for customers. That's the highest number. And they just started digitizing those pieces. So what happened was they basically, as you said, customer experience was going up and up and up. Employee, time was going up. So they had more time to spend with customers. And also what they did was they digitized as much of that sort of, we'll call it dumb stuff, like change my address, change my name, change my address and my phone number, things that people come into the branches and sort of clog up the branch with. And lo and behold, the people that were coming into the branches were having higher and higher quality conversations. Hey, I want to, get some money for my business. Would you like a loan? Do you think you might take an invoice finance facility? I mean, that's super high value, both for customers and for the bank. So
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've seen, the banks. So in some of the other sectors we work in, and some of the conversations I had with the people we work with at Microsoft this last few months, they've put a lot more work into bots and AI and stuff to take away some of the heavy lifting on some of that more process stuff that could be automated to either, I see even my own bank, Lloyds, they enabled you to, you couldn't at the beginning of COVID request a payment holiday other than if you pick up a phone, but within a couple of weeks they brought that forward to try and take that sort of overhead off of the call center and leave those calls to be used for something more interesting instead. So yeah, I'd expect more of that, but I don't know. I've not seen a lot of it, shall we say?
It's tricky. I know this sounds like an excuse, but it is. It's a good example of this. There was a feature that someone wanted to add on the app that just said, "I want to click here and get this account." Let's just call it, right. Get this feature, and from a digital perspective, it would take you about 25 seconds to say, "Oh, cool. That's a little box here. Tick this. Here's the workflow." But in the background, to sort of make that handoff happen, it was going to be sort of 6 months of work. So here's your business person saying, "I just need a tick box here for a customer experience." Okay, you have it in 6 months, or I'll tell you what, we can spin up a team in India or any place else is doing outsourced services. We can kind of make a little order sheet. It will pop out. That person will do the transaction automated. It'll be done in 24 hours, and it'll be ready tomorrow if you want it, right? I've got guys ready to go. And so if you can imagine, there's a real, since the pace has picked up, we talked about earlier, there's a sort of urgency to do it. I need the checkbox or else we're out of the game. And what you end up with, as you can imagine, is lots of manual processes that are stitching together, look like they're semi-automated, but they're not. And that is adding to the complexity we talked about earlier, that you got to unwind all those pieces that are happening, which is quite difficult. Imagine this thing is now moving and going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm conscious of the time we're spending, but the COVID period that we're now hopefully on our way out of appears in most industries to have accelerated the demand for some of those things. So that checkbox, as you put it, now was important. Now it's really, really important, and people are moving in heaven and earth. And maybe that comes back to your earlier point about maybe that apathy for change, or maybe, oh, it's too big a deal to do with it, it's not important to us. That's maybe been slightly different over the last few months.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing, definitely people who were behind on digital transformations have really been caught out, right? So the workforces have moved away. If you've got a manual process in there someplace, whether it was faxing something over here or whatever it was, now you're really exposed. And I think that's adding urgency. So I mean, most of the stuff I see out there is that digital transformation, and it's now, it was always high, of course, but now it's table stakes to be in the game. So it should be accelerating that. But now you're in a tough spot because you've got people everywhere, and you're also in a bit of crisis mode yourself, right? Sort of what's happening, and your employees are worried about this and worried about that.
And where do you think, I mean, you and I both operate in this sort of space, where do you think the opportunity is for external consultants and agencies and stuff to really help in this space? Because from what you're saying, in a way, the banks already know they've got a problem, but they need to sort their own back end system out. Where is it even worth us sort of trying to come up with good ideas or show them the art of the possible if actually their hands are tied?
I think you touched on it earlier about customer experience and joining up things. So it's taking the knowledge I'm sure that your team has from working in other industries, maybe, or airlines, or this, or travel, and sort of seeing what everyone expects is being done, and trying to help them to sort of find the easiest way to do that. So it's a bit of joining up the systems, it's a bit of process work, it's a bit of culture change around people to get used to that. But I think that's where what you said earlier about customer experience is totally true. And back to my point about managing the money piece, they can do that. That's what they do for a living. So you put the two together, and then poof, off you should off kind of go, basically. But you can help them to see that light from other industries.
Are there any particular innovations or things that you think are coming and on the horizon that either you think are going to be here in the next 12 months and are actually interesting, or were there things that you maybe were even talking about 3 or 4 years ago that you're now seeing finally come to market?
I think there's something about just improving that process. I mean, branches are still there, right? And people actually like branches, to be honest, right? To talk to people and everything. I just think that kind of mapping a conversation throughout the bank. So if you have a telephone call, if you have an email, and you have it there, it always seems like a one-off experience. So if I go to the branch, I've got to go and get the money. Why can't I order that money online, and I get pinged saying, your money is ready, or I want to pick up my money in Liverpool Street. I don't want to pick it up at home because I'm down there at work. So I think being able to allow customers to kind of cross channels, which is quite difficult, as you know, from other industries and things, but that to me would be a huge win, and keeping those conversations alive. I think if you look at USAA Bank in the States, they're always sort of the highest net promoter score of any company, let alone a bank. And I'm a member from my days in the military, and it is amazing. You're never lost. Once you call, you're always taken care of all the way through. The handoffs are clean. They're just little clever ways. Like I said the other day, I was checking in, and she says, can you look at there's a little code at the bottom of your phone app. Just read that number out to me. It was sort of changing every 30 seconds. And that verified me. It's like, oh, geez, just boom, instead of 20 questions. So yeah. This just between digital and face-to-face, just making that smoother, I think would be great, because they've made some good progress digital. They've made good progress on the branches. How do you get the best of those two
And
things.
you mentioned the USA there as a good example, or rather how they were doing things there. Do you think in the UK we are more conservative, or are we ahead of the curve? I mean, I'm seeing things happening elsewhere in mainland Europe, which I think are innovative, which I
Yeah.
know they're not allowed to do here because the regulations
Yep.
don't allow them to do it.
I think it's traditional, right? It's very traditional, and it's done the way it's been done. It's, as I said earlier, there's plenty of innovations happening, but it's just the pace isn't probably fast enough. It might be because of competition. You've got sort of 4 or 5 large banks that own most of the piece. Back to your point about monopolies and and competition. But you're right. I think Eastern Europe, I've done some speaking down there. There's some fantastic stuff happening there around, again, using the power of digital. I mean, one quick example was around a bank that was allowing their high street banking customers, coffee shop, to push out vouchers to their personal customers walking by. So you're a RBS customer walking by an RBS banked store, and you get a little voucher saying 10% off coffee, come on in, and you just swipe this piece and it paid for it and everything. So one swoop past the voucher. So this is a sort of joined up thing that's happening outside, basically.
But Rob, I think it's been great talking to you today.
Yeah.
It's
Hey,
nice
as
to
well.
know I'm not going mad, and someone who's seen behind the curtain, if you like, what's going on. That we're on the same page. Look, thank you very much for your time. I'm sure I'll put some links at the bottom underneath this video if you want to reach out to either of us. I'm sure Rob would happily talk to you. Sure. Available for hire as well, I guess, Rob, as an interim CEO, or well, you've worked with lots of tech companies. So anyway, we'd both love to hear from you. But been great talking to you. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, you as well. Thanks so much.
Not at all.